Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we will be discussing a topic that had disappeared on us many times. Ironically, it's about disappearances, strange disappearances. Now, we had actually just recorded this, and we have to do it again because my computer crashed to a blue screen, something that I can't remember the last time that I saw. Basically, what I'm going to get at here is that this podcast topic seems to be cursed. The first time we recorded this was like a year and a half ago, and we recorded it, and the podcast itself disappeared. A couple months ago, we were going to record it again, and Ryan's notes disappeared, so we ended up covering something else. And the third time, my notes disappeared, and so I had to go and research it again, with the silver lining being that I found some really interesting stuff that I hadn't the first time, but we got a portion into the podcast, and I blue screen, and here we are again, deja vu. So hopefully we'll get through it this time, and of course, just before we start, any of you out there who has a effed up story of your own, whether that's on the paranormal, conspiracy, or something of that nature, or if you have, pictures, video, anything like that, that's, effed up, we want to hear it. And you can get that to us at our official website, which is effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. And it could possibly get in a podcast and most likely definitely get on the website. So without further ado, our topic for the evening, strange disappearances. Now, as we had just done, Ryan's going to go first because his story is the only constant in this. We knew that we wanted to retell the story, and that's from a year ago. It's probably part of the reason that we kept in mind that we wanted to cover this topic. So Ryan, you can begin your story of the native village that disappeared.
So, this village and this story, like you said, I mean, it is very interesting. There's so many just different points to it that just scream mystery. That it like you said, it's been impossible. No matter how many times we've tried to recover this topic, it's been impossible for us to let this one go. And some of you might know the moniker that's put on it. The place is known as Angakuni, and it's called the Angakuni Mystery. So the story comes to us out of the 1930s. Of course, details and news reports are somewhat sketchy, and it's quite difficult to get a perfect handle on exactly what happened. But as the story goes, a hunter, I guess, for lack of a better word, was traveling through the far north of Canada and entered a small shanty town. Now, this guy's name was LaBelle, and as he, entered this little shanty village kind of place, um, he's greeted by these two starving and emaciated huskies. Which seems odd to him because the people, the native First Nations people up here, well, they tended to treat their huskies. That was their lifeline, right? So they treated them like family. They were well fed and looked after and taken care of, and it really kind of put him off. As he starts traveling through this little village, he's finding tents are flattened and overturned, and as he's kind of looking and picking through, he's finding these rusted guns and crock pots of food that have been boiled dry and all burned together. And the rusty weapons is something that he kind of fixates on. And to him, I guess, as he reported, it was one of the most bizarre aspects because the native people, especially around at this time, they didn't go anywhere without their rifles. This is that was their lifeline. Along between that and their dogs, that's how they survived the harsh frozen north of none of it. So as he continues and he's looking around this village. He reports that he gets a strange feeling. Something is kind of creeping him out, and he's finding more rusty rifles and these elk skin traditional I guess what we would call a teepee, a tent that have all kinds of them that have collapsed and were covered in dirt and snow. And he estimated that that there was about 25 to 30 people living there, and that by the rust on the rifles and the state of the place, that it looked like that it had been abandoned for months, maybe even a year. So while kind of still pondering these these mysteries, he happens upon one of their traditional burial sites, a cairn stones. And anybody who's familiar with the North, there's no digging into the tundra. It's permafrost. Perma is right in the beginning. It's permanent frost. You're not digging in the bury a body. So up there to keep predators away, and because they still are very they treat their dead in a very it's their honored dead, it's their ancestors. So they build these large piles of stone to protect the bodies from scavengers and desecration. But what he stumbles upon is these graves, these cairns the stones have been removed and the bodies are missing. Now, I mean, that is, for these northern native peoples, that is an extreme taboo. Even if you were moving your village, you weren't about to go and dig up your ancestors and take them along with you. They're the honored dead. They are resting eternally in that place. So that the implications of that really spark some serious fear in the poor guy, as you can imagine. Here they are. They've left their rifles behind. He comes across two of these starving dogs, and then later stumbles upon a bunch of dead dogs that apparently had starved to death. They were frozen and emaciated, and according to him, sent chills down his spine. Gave him very creepy feelings and really made him feel like there was something wrong about the whole place.
And I remember you saying too that the Huskies, were very important to the people. To that.
Well, that was their life. How were they going to get around? There's no roads. They had no 1930s. They weren't flying around on auto or with snowmobiles. That was literally the only way that they were going to travel and hunt and fish, was the use of their rifles and the use of their Huskies. That they were like family.
So they weren't going to leave that behind, right?
Exactly. No more than they would leave their rifles. Or, for that matter, even if they broke village, if you had perfectly good elk skins and seemingly the whole village was still there, in bits and pieces and in tatters, but it didn't look like there was anything missing. I think he's quoted as saying that there was no signs of any violence or anything like that, and that the place looked peaceful, but the air seemed deadly. I think were the quotes. So, the idea that a little village of 30 people that would just disappear in the span of a couple of months, and that all the stuff would be left behind, perfectly good tools and guns and dog teams, is just unimaginable. Something must have happened to all these people simultaneously, or near simultaneously. As the story goes, this individual tells his story, gets it in the newspaper, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, go riding up there to find out what's going on. Now, I wasn't able to find the article that I found a year and a half ago, but I do remember quite clearly that on their way to this village, reportedly anyway, the RCMP had stopped in at this small trading post somewhere in the far north wilderness, and I guess for a little rest or respite, and just asked the locals if they had seen or heard anything strange. Did 30 natives come passing by here over the last couple of months or anything like that? And everybody said no, nothing strange other than a few lights in the sky. That was the only thing that was pointed out as being out of the ordinary. So they continued on and reportedly found the village exactly in the same state that
LaBelle had said.
Yeah, exactly. LaBelle, sorry, had initially reported. So, in doing some more digging about this story, I couldn't. In fact, I came across several contradictions that seemed quite strange. That apparently, since that, 1930 is quite a while away now, and unfortunately, there's not going to be many records existing about a small village in northern Nunavut from the 1930s, but still, there's little information whatsoever about the people there. But the RCMP subsequently have denied that any investigation ever took place. And some people claim that the investigation indeed did happen, and they can't figure out why the RCMP would be lying about it, or maybe there just simply aren't any records existing from that time.
I don't know. You got a strange light in the sky, and you're talking aliens back when that stuff was really taboo.
Yeah, well, it's right in around the. Well, it's a little before the big UFO times, but
They would be even more against
Roswell.
it.
Well, it would certainly it certainly wouldn't do for a reputable department to say, oh well, an entire village of people disappeared and we don't know where they went or what happened. So, I guess that's all, folks. Nothing to see here. But it's definitely an effed up story if I ever heard one.
Well, I got one for you, Ryan. This one kind of blew me away. And especially keep in mind the light in the sky part that you just saw, or you just said.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I stumbled onto this, okay? I stumbled on a couple of these, very, very rare. I mean, I Googled the hell out of these things. Very hard to find new information on. I mean, there's just little tidbits here and there in the hardest, darkest little nooks of the internet. But again, I never found this last time, so if there is a silver lining, is that I came across this time. So the first story comes from China, actually, a place around Qinling Mountains. Okay, so it comes from China and is actually fairly recent. This only happened on Sunday, October 10th, 2010. So, I mean, a lot of these stories that we tell are actually kind of older. This is relatively new. Okay, and the fact that I hadn't heard of this before, and many of you, who are constantly reading the paranormal, I wonder if you had seen this, because it's a pretty big deal that actually hit the media and just total blackout. So anyway, it's 2010, and an entire village disappeared, okay? But not only did it disappear, I mean, similar to Ryan's story, this was engulfed by an intense blue light, and there's more details than that. But the thing about this is 2010, so there's a video on YouTube. You can actually watch some of this as it happened. There was a lot of bystanders that are actually watching this as it happened. So this video, now one thing to keep in mind, okay, like this is China. They own the internet, right? I mean, the government owns the internet. Once this had hit, I mean, there was little bits that got out, but they locked down the internet. People couldn't, they simply couldn't search for this stuff long after it happened. And there was a legitimate video apparently that had come out.
If you don't believe that they can sanitize stuff from the internet, just go and look up the history of it. I mean, the Chinese government is quite capable of just wiping stuff out that they don't want. I mean, it's happened time and time again.
Yeah, I mean that's their thing down there. I mean, the government has a lot of control. So this video, just to give you a little bit of a description, there's two apparently, allegedly. One is a legitimate video, and because that one had escaped, and you know how it is, like once something hits the internet, it's there, right? Apparently, what had happened is that the government had actually had one made that was very, very similar, but it was faked, with the whole intention being that, someone could prove that one was a fake, and, everybody would think it was the same video, and thus, it's
just discredit the whole thing.
Exactly, right? I mean, that was the whole purpose, essentially, behind it. So just to
brilliant psyop.
It is. And just to give you a little bit of a description of the video, because I've seen it, I don't know if it was the fake one or the real one, but, just to give you a description of it. And if you search Qinling Mountains in YouTube, I'm sure that you'll find it. But you'll actually see a very bright blue light. I mean, you won't actually see the village or anything like that. You'll see a bright blue light that's pulsating. And it goes on for quite a while, and that's part of this story, is that it didn't transpire over a couple minutes or 10 minutes even. It was a long ordeal. So this light had apparently been hovering over this village next to the Qinling Mountains, and the village had disappeared. But the interesting thing about it is what happens in between there, because there was news crews, journalists out around China who was actually trying to figure out what was going on. So I have a whole translation of the back and forth between the journalists and the news crew, and what some of the people had been reporting back and forth. So it's interesting to note also that a couple of the links that I had found, like I said, it's hard to find this stuff on this, but some of the links that I had found were of course on threads and forums of people who are obsessed with this stuff, and a lot of those links had led to a video that were mysteriously taken down with the YouTube note on it saying that multiple third-party notifications of copyright infringement, and of course that's entirely possible, but I wonder how many of those were, just an excuse to take it down. But anyway, so this disappearance allegedly happened at 4 a.m. Though most of the witness feedback seems to indicate that the process was actually very well underway by 10 p.m. the night before. Apparently, by the time that this thing was full blown, the army had blocked off access to the whole area. And nobody could get in and out. The main roads were blocked. It was just really shut down, hush-hush kind of a deal. But the standby witnesses did see basically all that was going on. So anyway, this feedback that I have, it does come mostly from the journalists and the people who had been, witnessing this as it happened. So anyway, this was reported. The show that was or the news channel that was covering this was called Sohu, Sohu. I don't know how you pronounce that. It's a Chinese news show. So I mean, yeah. Anyway, so what I'm about to tell you in regards to the translation, these are my words because the translation, as you can imagine, from China to English is rough at best. You can get the gist of what they're saying, but some words don't quite fit as well as you'd hope, and
probably
so on.
a Google translated version or something.
Yeah, I'm not sure who translated, but I know it wasn't in browser, but I do know that you've come across translated stuff. I'm sure.
Oh yes.
I'm sure you all are aware of what I'm trying to tell you. So anyway, apparently now a lot of people seen this. They saw the sky light up. With and this is from the art or the translated thing, so it's not word for word, but this is essentially as close as I can get in English to tell you. So it was lit up with several luminous bodies that were in constant rotation, and that's an interesting point that we're going to come back to. Though they could not pinpoint the actual light source, the light was blue, and everybody who were around this and watching it, they reported feeling very strange. They didn't really extend on what they meant by strange, but they did all report feeling very off while this was happening. The event was said to have happened over a pretty long period of time, as I mentioned before. I mean, it was well underway by 10 p.m., and it was 4 a.m. when the village had apparently disappeared. So this is not a short event, especially for something so dramatic. I mean, people who are away from the village, like from the video that you could see, I mean, it's very, very big what happened. So anyway, a lot of people, as I mentioned, they weren't just watching from their windows. I mean, they were outside. I mean, they were kind of socializing amongst one another. Nobody had really seen such a phenomenon as this before, and it was such a big deal. I mean, how would you be if you looked over the horizon and you knew where a city was, and it was just this giant blue pulsating, rotating light? So anyway, journalists, as this was happening and the word got out, the journalists started to drive all around the urban areas trying to identify the light source. But of course, they couldn't find it. And some of the reporters that were looking had said that the blue rotating piece of sky, and this is a point. So it's not to say that the point in the sky that was blue, they're not even saying that was the light source. They're saying that, because they couldn't pinpoint the light source, remember, but there was a piece of rotating sky, and it was surrounded by complete blackness, and the blue area of the sky was described and translated as an aperture, surrounded by other smaller apertures, which is to say there were openings. It actually, what it sounded more like to me as it was being translated is that the sky was actually split open, that the main centerpiece was a split in the sky in the shape of a circle, and it was rotating. And there were smaller rotating circles, or slits, if you will, around the larger one, and they were all moving around. And inside of these slits in the sky was some kind of pulsating blue light source. The journalist then noted in the translation that some of these vortexes were moving from one location to another, over different cities. They were, it wasn't just this one city. I mean, it was actually moving around, and some of the lights were actually flying back and forth, which to some might speculate that these could be UFOs. So there's more than just these holes in the sky. There's like an intelligent moving of lights and I guess peripheral or extra things aside from the main slit in the sky. He then went on to question, why multiple cities were simultaneously, experiencing this phenomenon. Yes, the light was moving from city to city, but apparently this had been going over, a couple cities at the same time. And again, like if it sounds a little chopped up, I'm sorry. It's a pretty rough translation. But anyway, the main journalist that was, in this report had conceded that it's up to the relevant departments to verify what this is. And most likely, I would assume that he's referring to the government and/or military. Now, I should mention that there were different excerpts from the translation that started with timestamps, but they weren't all really translated all that well. It made it really hard to follow when was happening. It wasn't like 4 a.m. this happened, 3 a.m. this happened. It was a lot rougher than that. But the last section of the excerpt said that it was around 10 p.m. when the witnesses said the light was more of a purple than a blue, and it was accompanied by thunder for a full half an hour. Now, if you've had thunderstorms, I'm sure that, the way we associate it with is there's thunder and there's a gap. There's thunder and there's a gap. So for a full half an hour of almost constant thunder, accompanied by this slit in the sky and these rotating holes of blue, is definitely strange, especially when they're going over multiple cities. And so I mean, it's a very strange sight. Now, during this time, China had blocked the subject on the country's internet network. I mean, and that's what I was referring to earlier. I mean, I don't know how they do it. I really don't know how they do it. I guess there's a main network that connects to the whole internet out of China. I mean, that would be my best guess. But they had it blocked. I mean, because there were students and there were witnesses that were complaining on social networks like Facebook and Twitter and email, which isn't social networks, but you get the drift. They were complaining that all of a sudden they couldn't look for this stuff. Everything was blocked. And from one witness in I don't know how you pronounce this, Xianyang City, Xianyang City. He was saying that the highways were shut down and the military was all over the place. So there's not a lot of there's not a ton of information on this, but it's for good reason. As I said earlier, the government owns the media down there, so like only a little bit of this had actually gotten out. And there is the video, the real video and a fake video floating around on the internet. I'm sure that I know that you can find at least one of them on YouTube because I found it. Now, I don't know what to make of it myself, but I mean, for a whole village to disappear and to have such a
dramatic event. Yeah.
I mean, it's huge, right? I mean, we're talking like the sky opened up, it was rotating, there was thunder, tons of people outside their houses watching this, and we're talking
hundreds or thousands of witnesses,
and we haven't heard about it, right? I
wonder, does this coincide with the UFO sightings that reportedly shut down that airport in China?
Well, I'll tell you one thing that people were trying to connect it to was a problem at a missile site. I don't know if it was nuclear missiles or what, but apparently
interdimensional missiles.
Well, who knows at this point? It could be anything. I do know that there were some people trying to correlate, the problem. I can't remember what the problem was at the missile base, but they were trying to correlate that problem with what they had witnessed over the Quinlan Mountains with this light. So, I mean, I just found it a very dramatic thing to be buried, within such a modern times. I mean, 2010, everybody has cell phones, everybody has, but that's the thing, there was a video shot, but I mean, you go try and find this stuff, it's like China shut that shit down, right? I mean, the little bit that got out is the little bit that got out, right?
And I do believe, correct me if I'm wrong, listeners and everyone else, but I do believe that China has a separate internet. They do have access to Western internet, and we do have access to their internet to a degree, but I do believe that they are two distinct internet entities out there in a lot of ways. That I don't know how they separate them. I guess it's the DNS servers are directed or kept separate from one another.
Well, you know what it makes me think of, and I'm just guessing, but I know that in like a company or a business, they'll have an intranet.
Yeah, and it's like a countrywide intranet.
Yeah, that's what it makes me think of, right? Like you can reach out, but only within the confines that they let you reach out, right? And that's probably how they lock down, and remove this kind of stuff. So who knows what other things happen over there that we can't hear of because of the lockdown on the internet. Not to mention that, I mean, down there, if you were to go against the government, I guess, and try to get this out there, you probably end up dead.
Yeah, they'd find a way to silence you pretty quick.
Yeah,
and I mean, that is bizarre. It's such a huge event. I mean, this is something that obviously over the last year and a half, both of us have done lots of searching on. I can honestly say I've never come across that story, not even a hint of it.
Me either. And the stories that I came across, a couple others as well, and the stories that I found were all kind of laced in the same kind of dark corner on the internet that I found. But I mean, even then, we're talking like scraps of information. I mean, it was just very, very little to go on. I mean, I searched the hell out of it, but very, very hard to get extra detail. A lot of it seemed to be copies and pastes of the same couple sources.
Yeah,
you know.
Well, you know what? That is a very interesting one. And staying, I guess, staying somewhat in with an Asian theme. I have a particularly interesting tale from Japan.
Okay.
So, in a Tokyo airport, 1954, there was a tall Caucasian gentleman who, reportedly was going through the customs along with everybody else and was getting his, went up to get his passport stamped. When the custom agents, they were looking at his passports and, they had no idea what country that this gentleman was from. And started this inquiry. Now, this tale is, I guess, generally referred to as the man from Taured, Taured.
Oh, I know the story you're talking about. Go on.
So he, he's trying to get his book stamped, and they're looking at it, and he's got, all kinds of stamps from other European countries and several from Japan, as if he had made several trips back and forth from Japan to this unheard of country called Taured. So, they bring him over to a map, and they say, all right, point to on this map where Taured is located. And the guy actually answers them in fluent Japanese, and proceeds to tell them that he was from a small country in Europe, right in between France and Spain. So, again, they can't find it on their map, and they say, here, point to it. Where is it? And he points to what is on any map we would look at, is a place called the Principality of Andorra. All right. So, according to the reports, the tale, the guy was shocked. And he's like, I don't know of any place called the Principality of Andorra. That is where my country is, Taured, and it's been there for almost 1,000 years, and then proceeds to produce a driver's license issued by the government of Taured, produces bank statements and business papers, all indicating that he was from this small European country called Taured. So, of course, they attempt to legitimize his papers, try to determine how truthful these documents are, and they can't find anything. His bank statements seem to be invalid. Everything is coming up invalid, right? But here he has like this whole collection of stuff from this country that nobody's ever heard of before. So, of course, at this point, both the customs agents and this tall Caucasian fellow are thoroughly confused, and they call in the authorities, right, and stick him into an interrogation room and just interrogate the crap out of him for like 8 hours or something. And again, like, he swears up and down that, I'm from Taured. I've been, over the last 5 years, I've been traveling back and forth with no problems. And, look at my passport. It has stamps, proving that I've been back and forth from Taured to Japan numerous times. So, they call the company that the man claims to work for, finding and discover, surprise, surprise, the company doesn't exist at all. So, I mean, after 8 hours of this, getting nowhere with this guy, they call in some higher ups. Now, this is going to take a while, so they take this guy and bring him to a guarded hotel room so he can rest while they get the proper authorities to come and do some follow-up investigations, I guess. So they left the airport under guard with customs officials and police, and stick him in this hotel room. And I guess I wasn't able to find exactly what floor he was supposedly put on, but apparently it was up off the ground, higher than we'll say at least higher than 3 stories. 3 stories or higher. Reportedly, the room had just a single small window, and no ledges or balconies or anything like that. And in the morning, when they go knock on the door, no answer. They go on in, and to their shock and surprise, the officials discover that this guy is gone. And according to them, the front door was guarded all night by police, and they search the room high and low. They can find no sign that he was ever there, and the guards say, we didn't hear or see him all night, and that was it. The guy just vanished.
So he sounds like a guy that came from an alternate reality, somehow slipped into ours briefly, and somehow found his way back. I mean, that is the first thing. And I mean, really, you really got to scratch your head that, any other explanation other than that would have to be just as bizarre. And it's I seen one remark that, somebody had the theory that, he was brainwashed. He was some sort of agent or some sort of something, and he was brainwashed into believing that he was,
But if you're going to go through all the trouble of brainwashing somebody, you're not going to give them a bunch of passports and stuff from a fake country.
Not to mention, how did it get out anyway?
Well,
right?
Exactly. All these other stamps. Really, the first place that the mind goes is, the idea. And of course, we have scientists telling us every year there's new discoveries that are making the existence of parallel realities more and more likely, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's up to the listener, it's up to the reader or the listener, depending on which media you come across this story. But it's really a bizarre little tale, and of all places too. That was shortly after World War II, and you're going to Japan to do some kind of weird, freaky spying with a mind control. It's a tale so rooted in the bizarre that it sends the mind reeling.
Well, now I have a story that goes all the way back to World War I.
Oh, there you go.
Okay,
we're really jumping around tonight.
We are jumping around. So the great thing about some of these disappearances, now Ryan, yours had an especially interesting twist in that, it sounds like a guy who stepped out from, a different, an alternate reality, or
maybe there's a show on another reality talking about the time the guy from Tourette disappeared to some strange country called Japan. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, that was strange. The other ones that we talked about were villages that disappeared. So when you're talking mass disappearances, of course, they are red flags. They're very strange. How does a whole group of people disappear and nobody can explain it? Well, right now, I have a story of a whole battalion in World War I that disappeared. Now, it's not quite a village, but it's a battalion of people, and there were hundreds of them. So this is about the Sandringhams, I guess that's how you pronounce it, who literally disappeared in plain sight during World War I. So these soldiers mostly came from the Norfolk Regiment, but at the time they were named the Sandringhams because they had all, they had all come from the staff of the Royal Sandringhams estate. The group was a company of military men ordered by the king in 1908, and in 1915, they were finally sent to war. So in 1915, this battalion was in Gallipoli Peninsula, which is in Turkey. They were with the Allies, and they were trying to advance on the positions of in the peninsula, or I can't pronounce it. Peninsula, I think that's right. Anyway, that was held by the Turkish soldiers. Now, of course, as you can imagine, it's war, literally, so it's really chaotic. It's a brutal fight, and at this time, the Allies were actually taking heavy losses. So this struggling advancement involving the Sandringhams happened over 2 days. The second day, the enemy fire was particularly heavy, and this is where we arrive at the strange part. The Sandringham battalion started advancing through ground-level clouds, and this comes from the witnesses that actually watched this happen. This was witnessed by people. When they went into these clouds, they disappeared and were never to be seen again. But that's not even the strangest part. You're at war. Yeah, okay, people got shot up, blah, blah, blah. Maybe it happened in the smoke, but that's not what happened. They walked into this cloud, and the eyewitnesses say that the ground-level cloud that they walked into actually rose up off of the ground and back into the sky where it joined with the other clouds. So it's almost as if this localized mist or the hand of God himself came down, picked up the battalion, and carried them to the heavens. Now, to put this in perspective, there were 250 men and 16 officers in that particular battalion. From the moment that they walked into these clouds, they were, for all intents and purposes, gone off the face of the earth. They never did find any of their bodies. Okay, so even after the dust had settled and people were poking and prodding through the dead, they never found one person that they could identify in this battalion. So none of them were identified as that battalion. That's something, right? Like 266 people, right? So even if they found one of these people and they could identify them, okay, they were in the Sandringham Battalion. I mean, that would be something. At least one person we could say, okay, well, obviously they were shot. Because here's this guy and he was in that group. But to not find any of them, we could throw this whole far-fetched. I mean, if they found one, we could throw it to the far-fetched wind, But since we couldn't find one damn body, how do you explain that? And not to mention that, was it a visual illusion? Well, the physical reality is that there's no bodies, at least from this battalion. So, from everything that people saw was a cloud that they walked into and it rose back up to join the other clouds, and all the people in that cloud were gone. Now, some people think, it was God that saved them. Some people think that it was alien intervention. I really don't know what I think, but it's certainly one of the stranger stories that I've come across.
Yeah, that most certainly is. It's interesting. That it kind of puts me in mind of the Roman Ninth Legion.
I read that story too.
Yeah, that is one of the most. The Roman Ninth Legion, that was 4,000 soldiers. They professional soldiers that disappeared without a trace. Now this was what back 100 AD. But they marched into Scotland basically and just disappeared. Like, there's no archaeological information whatsoever there's all kinds of theories, but there's no information whatsoever to corroborate what happened. And that's 4,000 men, trained, battle-hardened soldiers, just to disappear.
It's absolutely bizarre. Especially when we're talking mass disappearances. For a lot of people to go missing, we could have one person go missing and it's still really strange under certain circumstances. But to have so many people go missing and to not be able to find bodies or, hear stories of where they ended up, rumors that circulated back, it's just, really bizarre. Which brings me to, again, like, this is probably the last strangest story that I think is rare enough that very few of you have probably come across. So, the first strangest one was the Quinling Mountains. This next one involves not just missing, people that disappeared, but buildings. Okay, so this one is quite strange. There's not as much to it, but it's really, really hard to find stuff on this. So this has to do with a school that was made for people with ESP. And if you don't know what ESP is extrasensory perception. It's people that can see things that haven't happened yet, or they can see things in the past. Stephen King's movie, or his book, The Shining, and the movie Stanley Kubrick directed based on it. That was part of it, was the little kid had ESP and he could see the past and stuff like that happened at the hotel. But
I thought you were going to say, if you don't know what ESP is, turn this podcast off and go away.
Well, that works too. I'm quite confident that all of our viewers are very up on this. So, again, this was a school for students with ESP, which, it sounds almost out of the government, right? So, this was, again, one of the more rare stories I came across. There was this school for ESP and for people with ESP in Vanuatu. I don't know if that's the correct pronunciation, but for those of you who don't know, Vanuatu, or however the hell you say it, is an Oceanian, is an island nation located in the South Pacific Ocean. Okay, it's just weird words. Anyway, that's words too. Now, the information that I did find, again, it's kind of skim, but it's when you look it up, you'll probably find almost every bit you find is going to be like the same copy paste from, I guess, the original source. But anyway, not only do the students go missing in this school, but the friggin' buildings go away. So the way the story goes is that there was this female student, and she had to leave school one day for personal reasons. Maybe it was that time of the month. Anyway, when she came back, there was nothing. The students were gone, the buildings were gone. I don't know if she freaked out or went to the authorities, freaked out and then went to the authorities, or if the authorities came to her, because, the story conveniently leaves out some areas and there's some gaps. But anyway, however it happened, I don't know. Again, I don't know if this is a secret school either, right? I mean, that's just my guess. It's a school for ESP people. It's not the kind of thing that is publicly known. I don't know if the public knew about it. Again, this is a different country. But I do know that the next part of the story I could find is that the authorities are talking with this girl about what actually happened. And they asked her if she knew anything strange, going on at school. What can you tell us that happened at the school? Well, she told them, this was her reply. She told them that the students and the teachers were working on a time machine. Now, it's really hard to draw conclusions on the story because of the lack of information on it, but it's interesting nonetheless. You can speculate, was this a government-run school for gifted students, like realistic X-Men of sorts, ESP, the realistic version of X-Men, there's people with ESP. I know there's lots of stories and documentation on the government studying subjects with ESP. Would it be too far of a stretch to assume that they make their own schools for them, right? What about time travel? We know that it's definitely been looked at by the government and, military. It's been definitely attempted. We can assume that. And it's probably even been achieved. Even accidentally. We know it's accidentally been achieved if you were to believe one high-ranking military man with his experience involving the Philadelphia experiment, where he...
And even the Looking Glass Project.
Yeah, so, now I'm not familiar with that one, but in the Philadelphia experiment, this high-ranking military man tumbled off the ship and into a time tunnel into the future. He got a lot of, credibility, you know what I mean? So, is it possible that the school's project was time travel and they actually moved themselves and the surroundings into the future or the past? And just so happens that this girl wasn't at school the day they achieved it,
Good day to be absent, that's for sure.
Well, depending. Maybe they went to a better place.
They could be in some kind of utopian future that we're all dreaming about.
Or they could be like the Philadelphia experiment, embed it in the earth.
If they just would dig down a story or two, they'd find the entire school.
Yeah. So, really bizarre, right? She apparently had gone back to the location with the authorities. Everything was gone. You could say, well, maybe she was mistaken, or this place didn't exist.
The mad ravings of a paranoid schizophrenic.
Yeah, but at the same time, if it, I would assume that if it was a school for those kinds of people, it was probably pretty secret, and not necessarily public domain. Maybe people didn't really know about it anyway, right? So, you can take that for what you will, but that was one of the stranger ones. And I do have one other story. Now, this one you may be familiar with. I'm certain, Ryan, that you've heard this before. But this story is a really interesting one, and it's one that I know people have been clamoring at us, for years now to do something on Missing 411 with David Paulides. And, honestly, I thought we would have done one by now. I think we kind of hemmed and hawed just because, what can we do that's new that hasn't been covered?
We would have done it, but he declined to come on the show unless we bought and read all the books.
Yeah, and you did buy one of them.
I did buy one of them, that 300-page monstrosity. It's a great source of information, but it's about as exciting as an encyclopedia.
Yeah.
Right? It's not something to really captivate the imagination. To his credit, he's not writing stories. He is very specifically chronicling the specific events around specific disappearances, without any of the theorizing that generally goes on,
or embellishing, right?
Or embellishing.
It's dry, but it's true, right? And that's, so it's amazing in that aspect. And I mean, I've seen his many podcasts with him as a guest. And I've read up on lots of his stuff, and extremely interesting stuff. So what I'm going to do, I hand selected one little story here, rather than go into all of the detail and speculate on what Missing 401 is or could be. But this is just one story of a strange disappearance that I found really interesting. Now, this story comes, it happened in Mount Shasta, or Shasta.
Mount Shasta.
Yeah.
Oh, the one of the supposed entrances to the Hollow Earth.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean, Mount Shasta.
Mount Shasta
I mean,
is a mystical location.
We could do a podcast just on the location, right? I
Yes.
mean, it's that mysterious. For those of you who don't know, Mount Shasta is a volcano located in the southern end of the Cascade Range within Siskiyou County, California, if that's how you pronounce it. Again, all these why they name these things so strangely, I don't understand. But anyway,
I do believe though that's a native name actually.
Well, okay, well that makes sense. But it for someone who's not familiar with it, it's a guess as to whether or not you're pronouncing it right. So anyway, as the story goes, a grandmother's grandson was missing in a forest for about 5 hours, and then they suddenly found him, and he was hiding under a bush. Okay, so 3 weeks after this had happened, the grandson tells his grandmother he didn't like, and I quote, now this is the quoted text, he didn't like his other grandma, okay, who he referred to as Cappy, his way of saying Kathy. The kids, this is how they can't pronounce all the literature. Geez, I'm like a kid, right? Anyway. Anyway, the grandmother, of course, pressed him to try and understand what he was talking about, and the boy refers to her, he refers her, to when he was lost, these 3 weeks prior. He says, "Don't you remember when I was lost in the woods?" He told her that his other grandma, Cappy, took him to a creepy place and that she wasn't human, but a robot. Now, apparently the cave had, lots of spiders, but more interestingly, there were also purses and guns. So I guess this was to suggest that, other people had been brought there and, they either left their stuff behind, but it sounds more like their stuff was, taken and put in a pile, you know what I mean, in this strange little spot. So the boy said at one point that Cappy climbed on a ladder, and as the light shined on her, it made her look like a robot. So I guess it looks similar to when a light shines on metal, right? It's this shininess, and that's how the boy, I guess made that connection that she was a robot. The boy said that there were other robots among them as well, but they didn't move and they were motionless. So he then went on to say that Cappy had forced him to lie down so she could look at his stomach, and then as he put it, she tried to get him to poop on sticky paper. Right? I mean, that's kids' vernacular, right?
It's a very, very bizarre, but very specific, thing to say.
Exactly. Now, apparently he couldn't go. She tried to get him to shit on the sticky paper, and he couldn't go. So, what it sounds like to me...
I can't go when people are watching either.
I can't either. Not even for a whiz, because I got shy kidneys. But that's... But anyway... the sticky paper to me sounds like it was used, when I think
some form of a collection device.
Yeah, a collection device. Yeah, I think that's the best way to put it. I mean, that's the way it came across to me. So anyway, he said that Cappy told him that he, like the little boy, was from outer space, and that they, referring to Cappy and I guess the other robots, they put him in his mother's tummy. Okay. After that, Cappy had brought him back to where she had found him, which was under this bush, and she told him to wait there until somebody found him. So, he also told his grandmother that Cappy, she had the same face and hair as his grandmother. I mean, same feet, same face, same hair. I mean, she looked just like her, with the exception that I guess when light shined on her, she looked like a robot. So normally, we would assume that all of this has to be imagination of a young boy, right? But a past experience that the grandmother had, essentially convinced her that, there was something true about this experience. And she was quite terrified at the idea that she could have a doppelganger out there who would, abduct her grandson. And, the mere thought of it terrified her. So she phoned, the boy's father, and she explained that the boy had told him, all this stuff. And that's when he told her that the boy had actually told him the same story only days ago. So the experience that gave the story weight for the grandmother, actually took place a year earlier, before this had all happened. She said she was camping around the same area, and but when she woke up, she didn't wake up in her tent, and she wasn't in her sleeping blanket. She actually woke up face down in the dirt outside. She had a mysterious puncture wound on the back of her head, and she was not only violently ill, but she was out of her elements emotionally, or better put, she described it as emotionless. She was, very, very, I don't know if you'd say distant, maybe, just very like you're not really there, but you are. I've experienced that, the disassociation.
Disassociativeness.
Yeah, so I mean that's how she put it, and she assumed that this puncture wound that was on the back of her head, and just the feeling out of sorts and the sickness, she assumed that she was bitten by a
bug bite.
Yeah, a poisonous spider or something, right? But strangely enough, she went camping, and she had a male friend she was camping with, and he was sleeping in his own camper. And when he finally emerged from his sleep, he had similar symptoms. He had a bite on the back of his neck, and he was feeling quite sick himself. So the grandmother said the only thing that she could actually recall of the night was that when she would look, into the trees with her flashlight, it would reveal these red eyes, and she assumed at the time that it must have been a deer. But even if that were the case, she made a point of saying that other than two crows that had been out watching them, it was very unnaturally quiet there. Like, there seemed to be no wildlife outside those two crows. Couldn't hear anything. And, I'm sorry, I just got a text. I didn't mean to get distracted there. You're still there, right, Ryan?
Yes, I am.
Okay, good. Anyway, so it was unnatural there, and it was very, very quiet. I'm sure you've all have heard the unnaturally quiet situations,
or the association with high strangeness and paranormal activity causing a sudden silencing of the surrounding animal life. That's anybody who's been in the woods, there's this almost constant drone of, birds and bugs and animal calls.
Exactly.
It's one thing that's the most, if you've ever experienced it, when the woods suddenly becomes silent, that's when your instincts kick in, and it's like, oh no, there's something wrong. Things shouldn't be this quiet. Yeah.
So, it was really, really strange. And the whole thing to me, if I were to make an assumption, it sounds like an alien abduction, right? You wake up, you're not quite where you were when you left, and you have, the strange puncture wound, you and your friend, it's weird. But more than that, it sounds like the boy was alien in origin, like he was planted into the seed of a human female, or I should say the egg of a human female, and the aliens had come down disguised, as his grandmother, Cappy, in order to give the boy a checkup. He came down in a form that would be more comforting to him, and that's what I get from the sticky paper too, is that this was part of their checkup. They needed to get a sample. Now I'm not sure.
Well, feces is one of the best ways to determine the health of almost any creature.
Yeah, so it makes sense, right? So I don't know how the grandmother story entirely fits into this, because she's not the one who gave birth to the boy, but it does sound like she was abducted as well, as was her friend that was camping with her. And it sounds like both of them had been, had something poked into them, like where those wounds were. So I don't know, if it was for testing purposes or, they had something put in their body. I mean, there's foreign objects put into the bodies of alien abductees, but to me, the sickness that they had, no doubt, was a symptom of whatever procedures they had endured, while abducted, if that's what actually happened,
or just the anesthetic. I don't, I know I when I come back from anesthetic, I am fucked. Right,
yeah.
Like I react really badly to anesthetic, and when I come up at it from it, that's I'm messed up bad. And the generational aspect to the abduction phenomena, I mean, that's been widely documented. The idea that is not, if you're being abducted, chances are, your siblings and or your parents and maybe even your grandparents and their siblings were, it's almost like this program is very extensive and, quite possibly, I mean, I've read stories from abductees who say they'll never have children because they feel or they know in their heart of hearts that their kids will become part of this program as well. So they actively avoid having children as not to ever continue that cycle.
And that's a good point, Ryan, is that, a lot of these stories that you do find are, with abductions, is generational. It's not just one kid in a family. It's usually a couple people in the family. Sometimes it's the whole family. They've all experienced something. So however you want to make the connection, I don't know. But it was a disappearance. I mean, the kid disappeared for 5 hours, but I mean, it's still, one of those strange disappearances that, I think can stand on its own outside of the whole 411, the whole 411 concept and topic.
Yeah, and well, I mean, obviously, we couldn't do a episode on strange disappearances without bringing up 411.
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like to be
we'd be remiss.
We would, and I know people are going to want us to still do one, and eventually I think we will. But the interesting thing with strange disappearances is, there's no shortage of them. I mean, there must be dozens that I didn't pick. That I favored the ones I picked, but I mean, I'm
going to give you a real disturbing statistic or number now. I doing some reading earlier today on my break while I was at work, and I came across a number. Well, a couple of numbers that every 40 seconds somebody goes missing in North America, and that equates to roughly 800,000 people a year go missing. 800,000 people a year go missing. Now, I can't give you the numbers on how many of them are later.
Okay, folks. So, although I have cut it out, we actually Ryan just disappeared. So, so again, there's something to this topic. I don't know what it is, but we've been a little bit cursed trying to get it done.
A lot of technical difficulties. Blue screens. I just dropped out of this call. Full internet bars on my Skype, however.
Yeah, and we've had a couple little dropouts while recording. Not to mention the first time we lost a podcast, second time you lost your notes, third time I lost my notes. So hopefully we'll get this one out and it will exist, and hopefully YouTube won't lose it. So with that having been said, guys, I do hope that you enjoyed the strange disappearances, and I just wanted to drop this in here. Ironically, 2 days ago, someone had submitted to me he's writing a book on the disappearance of a whole civilization. Apparently, the first civilization before us. It was an advanced civilization. I haven't gotten to go through the stuff yet, but that's a potential new topic on disappearances. And of course, there's many, many more. We haven't covered 411 yet, and there must be a dozen different stories on the strange disappearances I didn't cover this time. I mean, there was that boat, the Mary Celeste. There was several villages. There were islands, Roanoke Island,
Roanoke Island, the Lost Colony,
yeah,
Croatoan.
So there's lots of stuff out there. I mean, essentially, we just had to kind of pick the ones that we favored for this one, and but I do think that we will get around to getting the next of it. That said, also we do have some interesting ones, topics I should say, coming up that we're hoping to get out before Christmas. If you've listened this far, if you're hopefully you'll be interested in the topics we do plan to cover. One is the Immortals, specifically shining a spotlight on the Wandering Jew. For those of you who don't know what that is, it is a Jew that was essentially cursed by Jesus to walk the earth until it ended. A very, very interesting story there. We also are looking into phantom phone calls, as well as a strange correlation that I found between tragedies and the witching hour, 3 a.m. So, with that having been said, I hope you'll join us for our future topics. And this is Will saying, catch you next time.
And Ryan Sharp, have a great night, everybody.
Third time, my notes disappeared. And so I had to go and research it again, with the silver lining being that I found some really interesting stuff that I hadn't the first time. But we got a portion into the podcast, and I blue screen, and here we are again, deja vu. So hopefully we'll get through it this time. And of course, just before we start, any of you out there who has a effed up story of your own, whether that's on the paranormal, conspiracy, or something of that nature, or if you have, pictures, video, anything like that, that's, effed up, we want to hear it. And you can get that to us at our official website, which is effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. And it could possibly get in a podcast and most likely definitely get on the website. So without further ado, our topic for the evening, strange disappearances. Now, as we had just done, Ryan's going to go first because his story is the only constant in this. We knew that we wanted to retell the story, and that's from a year ago. It's probably part of the reason that we kept in mind that we wanted to cover this topic. So, Ryan, you can begin your story of the native village that disappeared.
So, this village and this story, like you said, I mean, it is very interesting. There's so many just different points to it that just scream mystery. That it like you said, it's been impossible. No matter how many times we've tried to recover this topic, it's been impossible for us to let this one go. And some of you might know the moniker that's put on it. The place is known as Angakuni, and it's called the Angakuni Mystery. So the story comes to us out of the 1930s. Of course, details and news reports are somewhat sketchy, and it's quite difficult to get a perfect handle on exactly what happened. But as the story goes, a hunter, I guess for lack of a better word, was traveling through the far north of Canada and entered a small shanty town. Now, this guy's name was LaBelle, and as he entered this little shanty village kind of place, he's greeted by these two starving and emaciated huskies. Which seems odd to him because the people, the native First Nations people up here, they tended to treat their huskies. That was their lifeline, right? So they treated them like family. They were well fed and looked after and taken care of, and it really kind of put him off. As he starts traveling through this little village, he's finding tents are flattened and overturned, and as he's kind of looking and picking through, he's finding these rusted guns and crock pots of food that have been boiled dry and all burned together. And the rusty weapons is something that he kind of fixates on. And to him, I guess, as he reported, it was one of the most bizarre aspects, because the native people, especially around this time, they didn't go anywhere without their rifles. This is that was their lifeline, along between that and their dogs. That's how they survived the harsh frozen north, of none of it. So as he continues and he's looking around this village, he reports that he gets a strange feeling. Something is kind of creeping him out, and he's finding more rusty rifles and these elk skin, traditional, I guess what we would call a teepee, a tent that have, all kinds of them that have collapsed and were covered in dirt and snow. And he estimated that, that there was about 25 to 30 people living there, and that by the rust on the rifles and the state of the place, that it looked like that it had been abandoned for months, maybe even a year. So while kind of still pondering these mysteries, he happens upon one of their traditional burial sites, a cairn stones. And anybody who's familiar with the North, there's no digging into the tundra. It's permafrost. Perma is right in the beginning. It's permanent frost. You're not digging in the bury a body. So up there, to keep predators away, because they still are very they treat their dead in a very it's their honored dead, it's their ancestors. So they build these large piles of stone to protect the bodies from scavengers and desecration. But what he stumbles upon is these graves, these cairns, the stones have been removed, and the bodies are missing. Now, I mean, that is, for these northern native peoples, that is an extreme taboo. Even if you were moving your village, you weren't about to go and dig up your ancestors and take them along with you. They're the honored dead. They are resting eternally in that place. So that that the implications of that really spark some serious fear in the poor guy, as you can imagine. Here they are. They've left their rifles behind. He comes across two of these starving dogs, and then later stumbles upon a bunch of dead dogs that apparently had starved to death. They were frozen and emaciated, and according to him, sent chills down his spine. Gave him very creepy feelings and really made him feel like there was something wrong about the whole place.
And I remember you saying too that the Huskies, were very important to the people. To that.
Well, that was their life. How were they going to get around? There's no roads. They had no 1930s. They weren't flying around on auto or with snowmobiles. That was literally the only way that they were going to travel and hunt and fish, was the use of their rifles and the use of their Huskies. That they were like family.
So they weren't going to leave that behind, right?
Exactly. No more than they would leave their rifles. or I mean, for that matter, even if they broke village, if you had perfectly good elk skins and seemingly the whole village was still there, you know, um, in bits and pieces and in tatters, but it didn't look like there was anything missing. And I think he's quoted as saying that there was no signs of any violence or anything like that, and that the place looked peaceful, but the air seemed deadly. I think were the quotes. So, I mean, the idea that a little village of 30 people that would just disappear in the span of a couple of months, and that all this stuff would be left behind, perfectly good tools and guns and dog teams, is just unimaginable. Something must have happened to all these people simultaneously, or near simultaneously. So as the story goes, this individual.
Like moths to a flame, you've thrown caution to the wind for a glimpse into our world. Well, now you're in it.
Welcome to Effed Up Stories.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I'm your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And tonight we will be discussing a topic that had disappeared on us many times. Ironically, it's about disappearances, strange disappearances. Now, we had actually just recorded this, and we have to do it again because my computer crashed to a blue screen, something that I can't remember the last time that I saw. Basically, what I'm going to get at here is that this podcast topic seems to be cursed. The first time we recorded this was like a year and a half ago, and we recorded it, and the podcast itself disappeared. A couple months ago, we were going to record it again, and Ryan's notes disappeared, so we ended up covering something else. And the third